Hello, and welcome to the Engineering Influence podcast from ACEC. My name is Thomas Grogan, Senior Director, Economics and Market Intelligence, and I'm really excited today to have Tembi Hommes, Global Chief Data Officer from Arup, on our podcast today. Tembi, thanks so much for joining us.
Thomas, thank you for having me.
Well, it is our pleasure, and I would love to just dive right in and ask you, what does digital transformation mean to you?
Digital transformation for me is not always about the technology. I know the word digital is a key part of transformation, but for me, it's really about optimizing your processes, your guardrails to achieve your intended business outcomes and strategy. That's what it means to me. And it means, in some cases, modernizing some of your processes using, next gen technology. In some cases, it might just mean clarity on how you leverage existing technology, not necessarily leveraging new technology. So it's really about how you optimize your processes so that you can achieve your business strategy. That's what it means to me.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And so, in your day-to-day as Global Chief Data Officer, how do you work on optimizing some of these processes or putting guardrails in place?
So I like to say our industry, in as much as we may not realize it, is actually a really heavy data driven industry. If you think about designing infrastructure, the amount of data that you need to acquire, analyze, so you can determine the best solutions, regardless of the discipline, it's quite astronomical. We're talking a large amount of data. So in my day-to-day, part of it is thinking through how we enable quality of design and engineering, how we enable excellence in our processes, how we enable speed and velocity in how we deliver for our clients, and how we also accommodate changing business environment, how we accommodate changing climates in our designs and in our solutions, and how we do that while leveraging either the technology we currently have in making that very efficient, or how we continue to keep an eye on new technology that's coming so that we can achieve everything that I just talked about. So that's what I think about day to day when it comes to my role as Chief Data Officer.
Yeah. And so, you mentioned our industry, the AEC engineering industry is pretty data heavy, data intensive. You have a strong background working in technology in other industries outside ours. What are some of the lessons learned or, things that you might borrow or steal from another industry that you would bring into an AEC firm?
One of the really fundamental lessons learned in a previous role was how technology speaks the same language, how we can standardize and bring consistency to the data as it flows through the technology. So today, if I look at, Arup and our peers, and we take a piece of concrete, do we refer to that piece of concrete the same way across our industry? I don't think so. Do we refer to the components that have been put into a beam in a building in the same language? In some cases, yes. In some cases, no. What that means for digitization is that we become a little slower because we're having to translate the language that we speak in our industry. So getting to a common language on how we refer to really key components of our design and architecture and construction workflow makes it so much easier as a consortium because, as you know, we tend to deliver as consortiums, as partners. It's not one firm that's usually involved in a large infrastructure project. That communication, making that standardized and consistent, both from a technology standpoint, but also from a data language standpoint, I think would really accelerate some of the digitization in our industry.
Yeah, great point. And, this piece around interoperability and speaking the same language, I think has is relevant to a lot of parts of business. And you know, in your role, how do you think about, say, and this is kind of for advice to other firms,
Mm.
working with the C suite and coming up with the technology strategy and how you translate maybe business objectives to these technology or data objectives? What sort of guidance would you have for, a firm who's going to be undertaking a digital transformation?
I would say when it comes to interoperability, is to really think through what decisions you're making from a technology standpoint, not necessarily in a silo, but to think across your whole organization and to proactively determine how your technology is going to connect,
Mm,
how it is going to speak to each other. There's so many stories of companies purchasing technology because it promised them the dream and then completely failing to integrate that technology. And so not getting the return on investment that was expected or the efficiencies that were expected. So planning your integration strategy and thinking through how any new technology you're bringing in is going to fit in and how it's going to operate with everything you have, I think is number one.
hmm
Number two is don't forget the data. I like to say technology are the pipes and data is the water that flows through it. The way you connect your pipes is going to be so helpful in terms of whether you get fast moving water or it's going to get stuck somewhere. And if you decide to put in pipes that are not made of the best materials, you will get contaminated water. So you lose that integrity in your data. And then you spend a lot more time checking and validating and asking questions whether this is the right data set. So it is really critical to think of the data as part of any technology transformation.
Yeah, and I think that's a great analogy, thinking of water flowing through the pipes. Um, what are some, going back to guardrails that you mentioned in
Mhm.
figuring out your what digital transformation might mean? What sort of guardrails or processes do you think about putting in place to maintain that data integrity? That's, the life water flowing through an organization.
Number one is security.
Okay.
You absolutely need to make sure that you've got security and good governance around who can access your information, how they can access it, how often, how you deprecate access. Because sometimes we think about giving access, we don't necessarily think about how we monitor whether the right people still have the right level of access over time. We tend to forget about it or think about it when people are exiting. That is critical. It is also important to stress test your own systems, be your own hackers to see whether you're really sound. And anybody who's, a CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, or is responsible for that side of things, will tell you that is something that they absolutely think about to do their own penetration testing and to see how robust the guardrails they put in are. In addition, a lot of training and awareness to your own employees is critical because you're only as strong as your weakest link. If you think about major phishing or fraud that has happened to companies, it's usually via your weakest link. Somebody wasn't thinking, they were busy, something came through, they clicked on it, and it gave access to systems. And so you almost need that waterfall of guardrails to say, yes, how do you provide security to make sure, yes, somebody has clicked on a link, but how do you make sure it's not pervasive across your system? So security is number one as you think about digital transformation.
hmm Yeah, and you bring up a good point around the training and the people. How does your organization kind of train, upskill, make sure that as you implement a new technology, your staff are able to use it as efficiently as possible? Or is there also other training that isn't, let's say, software specific, but like you mentioned, the learning about phishing or scams or things like that? How do you work with, your HR group or your talent development group to kind of keep the skills of your staff modernized?
You're actually touching on a topic that's really top of mind at the moment. We are in the middle of our own transformation around data.
Hmm.
And when you think about, like I mentioned, transforming processes, bringing in new technology or leveraging your existing technology in a different way, the only way you're going to get success in terms of wide scale adoption and scalable leveraging of that infrastructure and new processes is your employees knowing about it, your employees knowing how to navigate what you've brought in and what you've put in place. So that is so topical for me. And part of it is working really closely with our learning and development function. So
Okay.
every organization, I'm hoping, has a dedicated learning and development function. And then secondly, there are partners out there that really help organizations with going through that journey and can really determine what the measurable impact of those learning and development initiatives are, and can really also articulate what success or what aspirational success looks like. So it's acknowledging that not everybody is an expert at change management or rolling out training. And so partnering with the right folks to help you along, but also making sure that as an organization, we're making the right investments in learning and
Hmm.
development and not just rolling out technology. And that's a common area of where people sometimes fail in terms of rolling out digital transformation, but forgetting about the change management and the learning that's involved.
Right. And so, you know, let's say an organization has started to do some of these implementations and the change management piece seems to be going well. What are some next step positive outcomes, measures, metrics they should be thinking about to know they are on the right track or on the right path of doing this digital transformation? Some people describe it as you're going to see a little bit of a decline in productivity before the curve swoops you back up and does a moonshot. Kind of how does that kind of what would that later stage in the life cycle look like at an organization?
I always say it has to boil out, it does boil down to your bottom line.
Okay.
Are you seeing innovation that's helping you become more competitive? And therefore, you're winning more bids, and therefore, your revenue is increasing. Are you seeing efficiencies or productivity gains that's making sure that your overhead is shrinking? It's making sure that you're focusing on shrinking your overhead, not necessarily shrinking the size of the organization. You
Hmm.
could still have the same level of employees, the same number of employees, but you want to make sure that if you're seeing productivity gains and efficiency gains, it's reflected in your numbers. And it's really hard and challenging to really point, especially if you're a data leader, exactly where you're making an impact. And
Hmm.
I think I speak for a lot of chief data officers here, even for some chief technology officers. It can be challenging to really point exactly where the efficiency is, but you have to spend the time to be able to make that link to
Hmm.
what you're doing, the productivity gains you're seeing, and how that impacts your numbers.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that is sometimes the key, right, as data people is we want to quantify everything, and yet the technological productivity gains can sometimes be very hard to quantify, especially in a professional services setting. So we've talked a bit about some of the data and metrics on
Mhm.
the operational side. Are there any examples of using data outside the operations of the firm and working on projects? So using data to deliver a project more efficiently or design it in maybe a more cost effective, sustainable way. Does that also touch on your role as being a chief data officer?
It absolutely does.
Okay.
Some of the work and some of the prototypes and pilots that we've actually done with Gen AI, and
Hmm.
we've been leveraging Copilot, Microsoft Copilot, have indicated that you can get up to at least 30-minute savings per day from an engineer who's leveraging Copilot in their work. Now, as we said earlier, what does the engineer then do with that time? Right? Does it become a wash because then they went and did something else that's not necessarily adding value? And how do you track an 8,000 person organization to see what the aggregation of those productivity gains looks like?
Hmm.
But yes, we've proved in a small cohort that you do get those productivity gains. And
Hmm.
how do you then trace them back to innovation? Because is the engineer or architect then spending time on innovation because they were able to get some efficiencies? And how do you track that back to a new bid in terms of winning that work? So we're seeing it at a cohort level, but then translating it to a firm level is something we're still working on.
Hmm. And so, what sort of challenges or I don't know, comments are you hearing from your clients around data? Are they asking for more data to be shared with them when they are, collaborating with you on a project? Do they not care? Like, has it changed? How is that relationship, um, you know, impacted, and what sort of data and metrics are out there that you're kind of working together with your client to deliver?
What clients are asking for before, they would say, you have the model
Hmm.
of the item, thing, infrastructure that you have designed. I'm comfortable with it. Let's talk with a construction
Hmm.
company. Now our clients are saying, well, actually, I want to be more sustainable.
Hmm.
So can you give me enough information that can help me if I'm in a hazardous location, for example, let's say there are floods, there are earthquakes. Can you give me more information about what decisions or options I have with regards to the construction? So
Hmm.
now your model has to be dynamic. It cannot be
Hmm.
static anymore because at each given point, the client wants to make a different decision. So they need the data to be able to make that assessment. So we find clients are asking for more and more information
Hmm.
so that they can make better decisions, especially around sustainability, around how they manage their carbon footprint, around maintenance. Right.
Hmm.
In the past, you could say, look, we'll just schedule a 2-year maintenance for this bridge, but we want to be able to leverage new technology that allows you to now have a mix of IoT, to then say, well, let's actually make this a data driven assessment which measures parameters or the number of vehicles on a bridge or the weather that's impacting that bridge, and then allows us to make a decision of when maintenance can actually happen. So we're
Hmm.
seeing a more request for data so that our clients can make more informed decisions, not just gut feel. In previous times, everybody is an expert and it's in your head and you can suggest or recommend a decision.
Hmm.
But now clients are asking for data driven decisions and options.
Yeah, and you bring up data to use for, say, sustainability and planning. What are, maybe how mature is that environment right now? Does the data exist? Is it being tracked uniformly? To what you were saying earlier, there's no standardized, or oftentimes there aren't standardized measures or language. What are some of the maybe limitations right now with data and sustainability, and how can it be improved?
So it goes back to how you assess carbon factors, for example,
Okay.
and how you determine the naming conventions of some of the pieces that are involved in infrastructure. I talked about a piece of concrete. If you want to assess the carbon footprint, both the embodied carbon, the operational carbon of that piece of concrete, you would need to know what went into it to make it. That is not consistent across the whole industry.
Hmm.
So within our own firm, we've got our own standards, our own language that we've created that allows us to be standardized within our own firm. But the moment we're now a consortium, that language is not there.
Hmm.
So the carbon factors themselves will tell you if you put XYZ in this piece of concrete, therefore this is your carbon factor that you have to apply. But then if it's firm A and firm B, and we don't necessarily agree on what we put in that piece of concrete in terms of the naming convention, then
Hmm.
we're going to have to do this in a manual fashion.
Hmm.
Whereas if we agreed on the naming convention, the language we used, then you can automate that process
Hmm.
because technology is as good as the standardized data that flows through it. Right.
Yeah.
So if you don't have the standardized data, it means a lot of these processes to really assess the carbon footprint or the operational carbon of assets
Hmm.
is pretty manual at this point in
Hmm.
time. And
Hmm.
then if you continue with that life cycle, when you come to your ESG reporting as well, companies are struggling with that because each company is still doing it differently. using different factors, using different language. So we do need to get to a point where that's all standardized. And I know there's a couple of startups. I know AWS has a few things going on with their climate pledge, and they've got, I think, about 400 signatories at the time who had pledged to start thinking about this data problem. So
Hmm.
there's definitely activity and action around it. I think we haven't landed yet. It's not yet a mature area.
Yeah. And so to, take a little bit of a step back for the type of, say, data maturity, technology maturity a firm like Arup has, ACEC has many member firms who are 50 employees or less. Some are just, one or two mechanical engineers. What advice would you give to a smaller firm who doesn't have all the resources or staff available if they were trying to start a digital transformation?
I would say start with your biggest pain point and
Okay.
start with table stakes.
Hmm.
What I mean by that is sometimes we all focus on the topical technology of the moment. Right now, it's Gen AI. A few years ago, it was blockchain. There's always some, before that, it was RPA. There's always some exciting technology coming through. If you're a smaller firm, that's not where you want to put your money. Let the big firms do the exploration, the prototyping, come up with the use cases.
Hmm.
There's simple things around, I mentioned earlier, how your systems speak to each other, how your folks in the field, your employees in the field can communicate with each other on a project efficiently, can make changes, can validate some of the designs, can check each other's work. Simple things that are just table stakes part of the workflow. We
Hmm.
make those more efficiencies. You will then have enough time and investment left over to then invest in the new topical exciting technologies. But sometimes just the normal business life cycle of delivering for our clients is very painful
Mm.
and it's not efficient. And sometimes we don't see the reason for investing in that because it's not the most exciting.
Right.
Just having a really good ERP that's integrated into your resource planning application, that's integrated into your billability, if it's a different billability tracking application, if it's a different one, your travel dashboards, for example, and how you communicate and share data across your own team and externally. It's simple things that sometimes are not set up the right way
Hmm.
because they're table stakes and they're not that exciting.
Yeah.
So I would
So,
say get your table stakes processes and workflows and applications working as best as you can. That sets you up as well for success as you try to leverage new technology.
right. So
Focus
essentially
on your
having
data, focus on your data as well. Make sure
right.
you've got a good data management strategy because that allows you to be able to move faster if you need to.
Hmm. So it's really thinking about the building blocks and foundational tools or components. So there's the tools, the technology, but then other stuff like data, communication skills, things like that are always, you know, going to be in demand and important.
They're always going to
So,
be demanded and important. If you think about financial services industry,
right.
my take on why they're always really leading edge is because
Hmm.
they're looking after our money
Hmm.
and they've had to have really robust processes, right? So when
Hmm.
a new technology comes in, their foundational infrastructure is ready because they've
Mm,
been forced to be that way because of their industry.
right. Yeah.
Healthcare is fast coming up as also leading edge. Part of it is because of all the HIPAA laws that are in place that
Hmm.
forces them to be really careful about that information.
Hmm.
And so that forces them to have really optimized infrastructure so they can respond a little faster.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. They are, I suppose, from a cybersecurity and regulatory framework, they have to. There's no room for error,
There's
right?
no room for error.
Right.
It is a very punitive industry. The consequences are pretty dire.
Hmm.
And I cut my teeth actually in data management on a financial services institution where I
Hmm.
spent 4 years helping their chief data officer with their data management strategy because they realized that was the most important thing they needed to do
Hmm.
so that they could remain in compliance and also respond to new regulations.
Yeah.
And I think our industry has regulations, I agree, but there's some that are forcing us to become that way. If I think about all the sustainability regulations that are coming up of the EU is drafting an AI policy at the moment. So there's a lot of regulations coming that are going to force us to really focus on the data management side of things.
Yeah. So then, for a firm who is going to undergo a digital transformation journey, what do you think are some of the biggest risks that they should be aware of? It seems like cybersecurity, security in general is definitely one of them. What else should someone keep in the back of their mind as they're starting to do change management, evaluate new tools, things like
Mm-hmm.
that?
Mm-hmm. This one is more, I would call it, we talked about it, interoperability.
Mm-hmm.
You do not want to bring in technology that cannot be integrated into your existing technology.
Mm-hmm.
You also run the risk of investing in technology that's a fad. We've seen that when it came to RPA, I think people were pretty disappointed with what RPA can offer. And so you need to be really careful about the use cases that you are selecting for the digitization and the digital transformation.
Well, that is good information to have. And Tembi, thank you so much for joining us. I do want to end, on a positive note.
Mhm.
What do you think are the top opportunities for firms with respect to digital transformation and, having a modern data approach to their organization? What can they look forward to once they complete this journey?
Innovation. Oh
Yeah.
my goodness. Can you imagine if we could leverage Gen AI to provide us with solutions and solve some of the most complex computations that we have to do as engineers? Can you imagine if we could leverage it at scale? I just think there's so much opportunity there. We're not there. We're still exploring use cases. But I just get so excited when I think about the potential of combining Gen AI and computational design, which a lot of firms actually leverage. I just think we can solve some really, really complex and gnarly problems.
Absolutely. Well, Tembi, thank you so much for joining us today. This was really informative, really helpful, and really learned a lot. I look forward to connecting again, and thank you so much.
Of course, you're welcome. Thank
All
you for
right.
having me again.